This video will be used as a quick guide to show you some tricks on how to use Excel to create a graph. Obviously my computer is a Macintosh, so if you have a PC, some of these commands will be a little different, but the general idea will still apply. The example I'm going to show today is from Experiment 2, and this is Part C, the last equations that you need to do. So I have started already by having the data that was provided on page 29 of Part C, but there are a few things that we need to do to fix this. The data in the lab manual has for the temperatures in degrees Celsius, all of them going to the tenths place. That means that we need to add a decimal point with one more integer after it. So what I'm first going to do is I'm going to highlight my numbers, and I'm going to right click, and I'll go to Format Cells. In Format Cells, I can go to Number, and I can tell it how many decimal places I would like it to go out. Now my temperatures look identical to the ones that are in the manual. We need to adjust some of these numbers as well. Since these numbers begin to vary, we'll have to go cell by cell to make sure that we do it correctly. So for this integer here, we need to go out 3 decimal places. So we'll right click again, go to Format Cells, Number, and we'll tell it to go out 3 decimal places. We also have to do that for this one. It needs to go out 3 decimal places as well. Format Cells, Number, we tell it to go out 3 decimal places. Lastly, these last two integers need to come out 2 decimal places. So I highlight both, go to Format Cell, Numbers, tell them to come out 2 decimal places. Now all of my numbers here look identical to the numbers that are in my manual, so I can begin doing the rest of my work. The first thing you should always do when presented with a problem like this is to go through and create all of your data first before you start your graphs. So in Part C, number 1, it tells us that we're going to have to do little k, the rate, as a function of of temperature in Kelvin. So we're first going to have to turn our temperature into Kelvin. So I'm going to make a title up here for it. You can see that this title up here is bigger than my row. So if I hold my cursor over the 2 rows, we'll see how I get this arrow that looks like this. If I double click on that, it will automatically set the width of that column to fit everything. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set an equation to tell the computer to calculate Kelvin for me. So what I'm going to do is go equals this number, see how it highlights it, that's A2, plus 298.15, oops, that should be plus. So we have A2 plus 298.15, and that will give me my Kelvin. So I only have to do the equation once. And see this dot here? I'm going to hold my cursor over till I get the black cross. I will hold it and drag it down. And that will do all my calculations for the rest of these. So if we look at any of them, A3 plus 298.15, A4, so on and so forth. So let's check real quick that we have our significant figures correct. We only go in addition and subtraction out to the ones, or excuse me, the 10th place here, so our answer can only go to the 10th place as well. So these are correct. So I now have my temperature in Kelvin. That will help me do my first graph. The next thing on Part C, number 2, asks for the reciprocal of little k, the rate. So I'm going to do reciprocal and this would be 1 over little k, so I'm going to write that out. And again, I'm going to come over and double click once I have that cursor so that it makes the column wide enough to accommodate that title. Again, I'll press equals. This time I'm going to do parentheses 1 over, so 1 divided by our rate. So I click on my first rate, I close my parenthesis, and I press enter. So there's 1 over my rate. In this case, I have 3 significant figures and 3 significant figures here, so I'm going to have to do some adjustments because we see 4 significant figures throughout the rest of these. So let's first go through and have the computer do the rest of the math. Again, I will hold my cursor over the dot and then I will drag it down and it completes the rest of the math for me. And now I'm going to go through and adjust all of these so that I have the correct number of sig figs. So for these first two, based off of this data here, when we do multiplication and division, it's the number of significant figures. So I'm going to have to only have 3 significant figures here. So to have the computer do that, I will highlight the 2 columns and I'm only going to come out 2 decimal places. So we go Format Cells, we go to Number, we tell it to go at 2 decimal places. Now each of these represent only 3 sig figs. For the next digits, we're going to have to adjust for those as well. In this case, we want 4 significant figures, 4 significant figures, 4 and 4. So we're lower than a whole number at this point. So for these first two, we can go in, Format Cell, and we'll tell it to come out 4 decimal places, and that will adjust for those 2 numbers. And then these last two, we're going to have to account for the fact that we have these zeros here after the decimal place. Those are both leading zeros. So we're actually going to have to go up 5 decimal places for these 2 numbers to have it display 4 significant figures. Again, if you need any help with your significant digits or anything like that, please contact me and come to office hours, and I'd be happy to help you with that. The last thing we're going to have to calculate is going to be the log of our rate. This will be log of k, little k. So again, what I'll do for this is I will hit equals, and I'm going to type in the word log, and you'll see a function come up. This is kind of shorthand for a type of mathematical operation. So I'm going to click on that. And when I do that, it automatically adds the parentheses for me. So now it's ready for me to just add in my numbers. So I'm going to click my rate and press enter. Now I'm going to go through and highlight all my answers again. So now that I have my log, I'm going to go up real quick and expand out my column just so it looks nice and neat. When we have the log of something, we go by how our reported number will be however many decimal places we go out. So we have 3 decimal places here, so our answer can only have 3 significant figures. So for these values here, we're actually going to means we go out 3 decimal places. So we're going to go Format Cell, Number, 3 decimal places, okay. And for these last two, we're only going to go out 2 decimal places because we're larger than 1 in our value. So we go Format Cell, Number, and we're only going to come out 2 decimal places. So now all of these numbers represent only 3 significant figures. Now, if you want to go through, you can kind of make your data table nice and pretty. You can go through and bold your titles. If you'd like to have this data be printed out and you want to have like a little border around each data point, you'll see something, a button that looks like this. You would highlight all of your data and click all borders, and that will just kind of add lines to everything so it's nice and easy to read what's going on. So here we're going to start making our graphs. We're going to make 3 separate graphs. The first thing you want to do whenever you're making a graph in our class will be to click on a cell that doesn't have any data in it before we do anything else. Then we're going to go to Insert, and we're going to go to our table or graph options. You want to look for the thing that has XY scatter, so it's just going to be dots. Don't do a line graph, we want XY scatter. So you'll click on that and we want the scatter. Don't worry about any of these other ones. For this class we won't be using those, so you always want to choose the XY scatter. When we do that, it generates our graph, and in here we're going to go through and select our data. So there's 2 ways you can do it. On my computer I have the option to select data up here, or you can right-click in the empty space and go to Select Data. Whether you have a Mac or a PC, you'll probably have to deal with the series portion. Some PCs will go through and auto-generate one series for you, so you don't have to add it. On a PC, it does not do it, so you have to add a series. The first series, it's going to be our first graph, and this is how we name it. So this is going to be little k, versus temp, and I'm going to put in Kelvin so I know what I'm doing there. All right, so I'm first going to highlight my X values. To do that, I'm going to use this button, and I'm going to highlight my temperature values in Kelvin. Once I have those highlighted, I hit the button again, and that fills in my data for my X values. I'm going to do the same thing with my Y values, which would be my Ks. Once I have that done, I press OK, and here's my first graph. Now, to add a trend line to see if we're linear and to show our equation, we right-click on any of the data points, and we'll see this Add Trend Line. In our class, it should default to linear, so make sure that is there, and then we're going to scroll down and add Display Equation on Chart and the R squared. Once you have both of those, you can close it, and then move your equation and R squared to somewhere where you can read it easily. R squared is a very important value for us. It helps us determine how linear a line is. So I'm going to just move this over here for a moment. So we can see that we have a pretty terrible R squared here because we're not even close to 1. So this probably is not going to be the data that we're going to use that would be linear. The last thing you'll need to do on your chart is to add some titles for your axes. The way you can do that is either right-click on your chart, and you can go through and format chart area, or you may have on your chart already an Add Chart Element button. And so you can just go down and tell it that you want to add a primary and a horizontal title. And so you can go in here, and this would be our rate. So rate, and then parentheses, mega per seconds. Oops. Like so. Okay, and then I'm going to have my title over here, and this is going to be temperature. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Just need to click on it. This is going to be our temperature in Kelvin. Okay, so there's my first graph completed. I'm going to move on to my second graph now, where I will again highlight an empty box, go to Insert, XY Scatter. I'm going to right-click on my empty box, select Data, add a series, and this time I'm going to name the series, we're going to do number 2, so we're going to do reciprocal, oops, of K versus temp in Kelvin. Okay, so that's the name of my new graph. Again, I'm going to highlight my temperatures in Kelvin for my X values. Once you've highlighted them, hit the button again. Then we're going to do our Y values. This time we're going to take our reciprocal values. Highlight those. We now have both of our X and Y's generated. Press OK. It will generate a new graph for us. Oops, it looks like I selected the wrong graph. See how it already made a line to connect all of them? So we're actually just going to go through and we're going to change chart type and say XY scatter. So it's very easy. Once the data is in here, if there's anything you need to change, everything is all connected to each other. So for instance, if this number was different, I could just change it and it will change all of the stuff in the graph for me. So it's very nice once you use the graph and know how to tie everything together. It makes it very easy to go through and change things. So again, we're going to add our trend lines. We're going to right click on a data point, add trend line. It'll default to linear. We're going to scroll down and display the equation as well as the R squared. So now we can see that our R squared has gotten a little better. We're at 0.8 instead of 0.7, but still probably not the greatest. So we're going to do our last graph. Looks like I accidentally had an extra one there. We're going to do our last graph, which is going to be the log of the data. So again, I click on an empty spot, Insert, XY Scatter, Scatter Graph, right-click, select Data. Now I'm going to add my series, and the last one here is going to be log of rate versus temperature in Kelvin. My x values again are my temperature in Kelvin. My y values this time will be the log. Everything looks good. Press OK. Generates my graph. Again, we're going to go through and add our trend lines. We right-click on any of the data points. Add trend line. It will default to the linear. This is starting to look a lot nicer. We're going to display our equation and our r squared. This time we can see that our r squared is very, very close to 1.999, so that's a very good sign. And then the last thing I just need to do on both of these will be to add my titles to my axes. So I could go ahead and add those in. And I can fill that information in. Make sure as you're going through your graphs that you have them with the appropriate unit, that you can be able to use them. One last note, for example, on page 31 of your questions for this lab, you're asked to use your straight line equation to solve for some information. So make sure you use the appropriate equation. You would never use a nonlinear line for that. I hope this video helps, and as always, if you have any questions, please come to office hours and I'll be happy to help.